Hello and welcome everybody, it's Matt from Cardboard Odysseys. Today I've got one of my most anticipated commander decks that I've wanted to build for a while here. Ever since it got spoiled, I was just like, I love it. I love Animarch Cascade, as Cascade has been just super fun. It's just random, chaotic, awesome, different every time. It's pretty cool. So when I saw Zhulodok Void Gorger, I was like, okay, I'm in. My deck techs are fairly long. This is a non-budgeted version. This is like $1,000 deck, but you could definitely make this cheaper. A lot of the expensive things are the lands, I believe. Price save. So yeah, $200 in the creatures, $16 in the sorceries, $3 in the instants. Oh, so the artifacts and the land. $750 in the artifacts. There's definitely a couple artifacts you can remove and make this deck way cheaper. But this is just the deck that I chose, and once you get to the expensive cards, you'll see you don't need them, not at all. But it's nice to have. So, my deck techs are long. However, I like to go through each card, explain why I put it in the deck, and what to look out for when you're playing it. So if you're not sure what Zhulodok Void Gorger does, it's 5 colorless and 1 generic, I believe it's called. Colorless spells you cast from your hand with mana value 7 or greater have Cascade. If you're not familiar with Cascade does, when you cast one, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast without paying its mana cost. Then you put all the exiled cards in the bottom of your library in a random order. Then you do it again. And it's a 7/4 Eldrazi. This is an Eldrazi-centric deck. But it's also just colorless stuff. But yeah, why not play the Eldrazi? The good Eldrazi you're going to play, of course. If it's above 7, you're basically gonna play it. The deck kind of built itself a little bit, but there are some choices. So yeah. First one here, we got some Planeswalkers. Ugin the Ineffable, Ineffable. It's only 6 mana, so it doesn't actually trigger Zhulodok, but it is so good that it needs to be in here still. Because colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. And then for the +1 ability, exile the top card of your library face down and look at it. You create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token. When that token leaves the battlefield, you put the exiled card into your hand. And then you can also -3 destroy target permanent that's 1 or more colors. This is mainly in here for the destroy, and the colorless cost 2 less to cast. And that's mainly why it's in here, because making this stuff cheaper, if it's still cascades, even if it's cheaper, as long as the mana value is 7. Yeah. Next card here, Ugin the Spear Dragon. This is more than 7. This is 8. You can +2 equipped, or I'm sorry, Ugin the Spear Dragon deals 3 damage to any target, which is just kind of whatever. The -X, each permanent with mana value X or less. Exile each permanent with mana value X or less that's 1 or more colors. This will never hit any of your stuff because your stuff is all colorless. So this is just a one-sided board wipe, which is fantastic. And it starts off as 7 loyalty, so you'll basically be able to board wipe with this. And the stuff sounds expensive, but it's really not. The fact that you're able to play all colorless land and all the mana rocks that tap for 1 billion colorless, you don't have to worry about mana colors. Oh, it's so good. Mana screw is like non-existent in this deck. And then -10, you gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, and then you can put up to 7 permanents from your hand on the battlefield. This is just bonkers. But just note that you're not casting them, so if Zhulodok's out there, you're not going to get the cast on any of these. These are just put into the battlefield. The next one here is Obtruse Archaic. 4 colorless for a 3/4. Vigilance. 1 colorless. Tap it. Copy target activated or triggered ability you control from a colorless source. You may choose new targets for the copy. Most notably, Zhulodok Void Gorger is a triggered ability, so you can copy that. So it'll cascade 4 times instead of just twice. Very strong. There's a bunch of other stuff you can copy too, but that's the main one. Alright, Artisan of Kozilek, 9 mana. When you cast a spell, you may return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is great. Annihilator 2, which is pretty great, and it's a 10/9. And it will cascade twice. You got the Bane of Balagad, 7 mana, cascade twice, great. And then whenever it attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents they control. So it's like it's sort of better Annihilator, which is pretty wild, and it's a 7/5. Breaker of Armies. All creatures able to block Breaker of Armies do so, and it's a 10/8 Eldrazi, and it has it's 8 mana cost, so it will cascade twice, as long as you have your Zhulodok out there. You've got your Conduit of Ruin. Again, a little annoying, 6 mana instead of 7, but when you cast this spell, you may search your library for a colorless creature card with mana value X mana value 7 or greater, reveal it, and then put that card on top. And then the first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 colorless less. Again, reducing the colorless mana that they cost to cast doesn't reduce their mana value, so you'll be able to still cascade as long as it's 7 or more as the mana value. And basically the number top right of the card, if it's 7 or more, cascade twice. So reducing it is good. Deceiver of Form, 7 mana, great, 8/8, awesome. Creature. At the beginning of combat on your turn, reveal the top card of your library. If a creature card is revealed this way, you may have creatures you control other than Deceiver of Form become copies of that card until end of turn. You may put that card on the bottom of the library. This can cause some really crazy things to happen. If you have something with Annihilator on top, they'll become, all of your creatures will have Annihilator X, whatever that is, plus they'll be massive. So you really could tutor up with Conduit of Ruin, and then also follow that up with attacking with Deceiver of Form, going into combat. Or you don't need to attack with it, you just have to have it go to combat. Reveal the top card. If you can manipulate the top of your deck at all and get some really nasty thing on top, you're in good shape. Desolation Twin, 10 mana for a 10/10, and when you cast it, you create a 10/10. So you get to so for 10 mana, you get 2 10/10s, and you get to cascade twice as long as your commander's out there. Pretty strong. Emrakul, the Promised End. You can't play the good Emrakul, so you gotta sacrifice and play this guy. He's not terrible, but he's pretty strong. But so 13 mana for a 13/13. It costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard, so it can be cheaper. And when you cast the spell, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an additional turn, and it is a flying trample protection from instants. So yeah, you can do some pretty good things. I mean, you can wreck somebody's day taking control of their turn. I mean, it's pretty strong. Endbringer, so 6 mana again, slightly under the 1 more mana needed for 7, but untap Endbringer during each other player's untap step. That's pretty cool. And you can tap it, ping any target. You can tap it with a colorless. Target creature can't attack or block this turn, which is great. Or you can just tap 2 colorless, tap it, draw a card. It's a 5/5, so not too bad. Layer of Loyalties, 10 mana for a 10/10. It's an Eldrazi with Trample, Annihilator 2. And when you cast this spell, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. Until end of turn, it has base power and toughness 10/10 and gains Trample, Annihilator 2, and Haste. Notably, you can target your own stuff and then give your you could target this if you really wanted to. If you needed a 10/10 Annihilator 2 Trample Haster. But yeah, it's pretty good. And of course, it cascades twice. It That Betrays, 12 mana for an 11/11. It will cascade as well. Annihilator 2. And whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, put that card on the battlefield under your control. It's pretty good. It's kind of like Turgid, but like in colorless. And it costs 12. So, you know. Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, probably one of the best cards in the deck because it is 10 mana for a 12/12, Annihilator 4, and whenever you cast the spell, draw 4 cards. And whenever Kozilek, Butcher of Truth is put into the graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles shuffles their graveyard into their library. I think there's a loop where you can draw a lot of cards to the point where you'll need this to shuffle your library back in. I forget what combos are in this deck entirely. But yeah, nice to have. Kozilek the Great Distortion, another great Kozilek, the second best Kozilek in the deck. Maybe the first, depending, because it's pretty insane. So 10 mana for a 12/12, so we'll double cascade as well. When you cast a spell, if you have fewer than 7 cards in your hand, draw cards equal to the difference. I love drawing a bunch of cards. It has Menace, no Annihilator, but you can discard a card with mana value X, counter target spell with mana value X. So if somebody casts a 4-drop, you can discard a 4-drop and counter it. Pretty good. Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter, 3 colorless for a 1/2 flash, flying. You may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. So this basically reads, you may cast any spell in your deck as though it had flash. Pretty good. And then also, whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Liberator, Urza Battlethopters, you put a 1 counter on the Liberator. Just note that when you're cascading, you're not paying any mana for them, so this will not trigger. So anytime you cast anything for free, this will not trigger. You have to spend the mana on it. Just as a side note. At first, I thought it was insane. It's less good, but this part is still insane, so pretty good. Meteor Golem, 7 mana, so it'll double cascade, which is great. 3/3, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls. So removal on a 7/7 body or a 7 mana body is good enough when you can cascade twice. It becomes way less good if you don't have your commander out. So try to only cast this when you have your commander out, otherwise it becomes pretty bad. Oblivion Sower, 6 colorless mana for a 5/8. When you cast this spell, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of their library. Then you may put any number of lands that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. Pretty good. It doesn't cascade because it's only 6 mana, so that kind of sucks. But in practice, this has gotten like anywhere between 1 and, well, obviously 1 and 4, but, well, 0 and 4. But on average, it seems to be about 2 or 3, depending on who you target. Obviously, target the one that has the most lands. But also note that the way that it's worded, you may put any number of lands that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. So if you do happen to want to play the Ugin that when you target somebody, or maybe, who is it? One of the commanders, I think it starts with a K, I can't remember, or not commanders, Planeswalkers. Karn? Yeah, Karn, like you target somebody and they exile a card from their hand. If you happen to play that, which you could because it cascades, you could, like, you know, get the lands from the exile. Or if you exile their graveyard, then you can then get up to 4 lands as well. So there's ways to play around this, is what I'm trying to say. You got Palladium Mirror. This is just a mana rock. Just 3 mana for a 2/2, taps for 2 mana. Pathrazor of Ulamog, 11 mana, 9/9, Annihilator 3, and he can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures. So, like, kind of Giga Menace, and then also Annihilator 3, which is pretty insane. And of course, it cascades twice. Skittering Cicada, another strong card, kind of like Urza's Battlethopter, but has a different effect. It's very interesting. So 3 mana for a 2/2 flash, and then you can cast your colorless spells as though they had flash. And then whenever you cast a colorless spell until end of turn, Skittering Cicada gains trample and XX, where X is that spell's mana value. You can make Skittering Cicada massive. If you start discounting your spells and casting like 10 drops back to back, also cascading as well, you're casting them, that'll get XX where it spells mana value. Mana value meaning the top right mana value. Even if you're casting it for free, you still get it. So this can easily be a 20/20, 30/30, 40/40 by the end of your cascading turns, and it can be insane. Ulamog's Crusher is 8 mana for an 8/8, Annihilator 2, and he attacks each turn if able. Just another Cascader, Annihilator creature. Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, 10 mana for a 10/10. When you cast the spell, exile 2 target permanents. It is an indestructible Ulamog, and then whenever it attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of their library. So just another big dude that exiles stuff when you play it, cascades twice, you know, all good things. And then the milling is, actually not even mill, it's exile. It's not bad. Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, 11 mana for a 10/10. Whenever you cast a spell, destroy target permanent. It is indestructible as well. Has Annihilator 4 as well. And then if it were to put in graveyard from anywhere, it shuffles their graveyard into their library. Its owner does do that, which is nice. Void Winnower, this card is pretty insane. 9 mana for an 11/9. Your opponents can't cast spells with even mana value. 0 is even. And your opponents can't block with creatures with even mana values. But not being able to cast free spells is pretty darn good. And also even mana is fine as well. A lot of counter spells are even or free, which is good. A lot of interaction is free or even, which is great. So if they're not paying anything, they can't, well, it's mana value. I'm not really sure what the mana value of like a Fierce Guardianship is. It's probably still 3, but either way, still very strong. All is Dust. So now we're in the Sorceries section here. There's not a ton of Sorceries. There's only 3 of them. Well, that I run at least. All is Dust is 7, so it will cascade. And you don't care what it cascades into because you're not going to sacrifice it, because each player sacrifices all permanents they control that are 1 or more color. All your stuff is colorless, so you'll sacrifice nothing. It's a one-sided board wipe, and it sacrifices all kinds of colorless or colored permanents. That's 1 or more colors. That's fantastic. And you get to cascade twice. Great. Calamity of Titans. This is only 6 mana, which is very sad. But it's a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, reveal a colorless creature card from your hand, easily enough. Exile each creature and planeswalker with mana value less than the revealed card's mana value. You can typically use this as a one-sided board wipe. I'm not 100% sold on this card. It doesn't cascade, and it's probably not needed, but I felt like there might not be enough. Well, the fact that you're exiling your stuff as well, not great. This is probably the one card I would like almost certainly remove if I like in practice it just felt kind of bad. This is the one card I'd remove and replace it with something else. Rise of Eldrazi, fantastic. The opposite of that. So it is 12 mana, but this spell can't be countered. That's fantastic. Destroy target permanent. Target player draws 4 cards. I don't know why you would ever pick anybody else but yourself, unless you're going to mill somebody and win from that. And then you also get to take an extra turn after this one, but it does get exiled. So you'll cascade twice. You'll draw 4 cards, destroy permanent, take an extra turn. All good things. Sounds like a lot of mana, but like I said, trust me, you're going to have a lot of mana. Now we're over to the instants. Desecrate Reality. So it's 7 mana instant spell. For each opponent, exile up to 1 target permanent that player controls with an even mana value. 0 is even, so tokens are good. And then it has Adamant. If at least 3 colorless mana was spent to cast the spell, which they will, you're only going to cast colorless on it. Return a permanent card with an odd mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield. Also pretty great. Not of This World, another tribal instant, so it's an instant sorcery for 7 mana. Counter target spell or ability that targets a permanent you control, and it costs 7 less to cast if it targets a spell or ability that targets a creature you control with power 7 or greater. The majority of your creatures are going to have a power 7 or greater, so this is just a nice free counter spell for any of your stuff. Most notably, it will still cascade if you cast it for free, which is great. Scour from Existence. One of the very few, if any, instant spells that exiles something or a permanent. It costs 7 mana, which is horrible. However, it will cascade twice if you have your commander out, so it's great in this deck. You've got Titan's Presence, 3 colorless mana instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, reveal a colorless creature card from your hand. Exile target creature if its power is less than or equal to the revealed card's power. This is almost certainly remove anything, but I mean there is an instance where if their creature is too large, this does nothing. But most of the time, this will remove something because you'll have a creature that's like a 7/7 or a 10/10 or 12/12, whatever. Warping Whale, so another instant spell. 2 colorless mana. Choose 1. Exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. This actually hits a surprising amount of things, so it's pretty decent. Counter target sorcery spell. This is pretty good. A colorless counter spell, pretty strong. Or you can create a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion creature token, which I would almost never use. You got a Chroma's Memorial, and we're into the legendary artifacts. There are a lot of artifacts because it's a colorless deck, so it makes sense. This is one of those decks that it's going to explode all in typically in one turn. You're going to cascade a bunch, and then Chroma's Memorial is fantastic for this because it gives you haste. So creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and red. It's 7 mana, so it cascades, which is fantastic. But it makes all of your Eldrazi scary as hell. When they get to come into the battlefield, do something big, and then also swing and do like Annihilator. Chroma's Memorial is bonkers good. Very strong. Basalt Monolith. One of the ways to have infinite mana in this deck, you just need Basalt Monolith and some kind of way to discount the untap ability of it, or some kind of way to copy it, basically. Making it tap for more mana, which we'll get to. But it's 3 mana, taps for 3 mana, but it doesn't untap during your untap step, but then you can pay 3 mana to untap it. Commander's Plate is a really good equipment that just gives it protection from all colors, because it says that equipped creature gets +3/+3 and has protection from each color that is not in your commander's color identity. This is going to be basically just protection from all colors because your commander has no identity, no color identity, which is fantastic. Darksteel Monolith, 8 mana, indestructible. Once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a colorless spell that you cast from your hand. This thing's bonkers. It cascades. It makes it shuffle free once per turn, which is including on your opponent's turn, which is fantastic. You can do some pretty insane things. You're gonna see a lot of mana rocks. Big mana rocks, 6 mana for 3. Taps for 3, but you can also tap it for 3 and sacrifice to draw 3 cards. Which is great. Expedition Map, it does play Tron, so you're going to want to play Expedition Map in order to try to get your Tron online. It plays like better Tron, which is pretty cool. They've introduced some really cool tech that allows your Tron to be more, I guess, easier to assemble, which is cool. So you definitely want to play Expedition Map. You probably want to play more things like Expedition Map, but I'm not entirely sure if there's more than this. You got Forsaken Monument. This is the one that combos with the Basalt Monolith, and also your, I guess technically your Grim Monolith, but not quite. So for 5 mana, this gives colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Not that important, but still relevant. And then also, whenever you tap a permanent for a colorless, add an additional colorless, which is why, so normally Basalt Monolith taps for 3 and untaps for 3. This now will make it tap for 4 and untap for 3, so you'll net 1 mana every time you do that. So you'll have infinite. And then whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. Pretty good. This is Grim Monolith. This is just another way to ramp in mana. It taps for 3 mana, then untaps for 4. Even if you give it, obviously, taps for 4, untaps, it's just tapping a bunch. So unless you have something that like triggers based on artifacts being tapped, this won't do anything. But this is mainly in here to try to ramp as fast as possible. And there are ways to untap it other ways that we'll get to. Hedron Archive, this is just another mana rock. Basically, every mana rock that is the colorless mana rock that can tap for at least equal to half or more of the mana value that you pay into it is what I'm running, if that makes sense. So 4 taps for, divide that by 2, it taps for 2. And same thing with the Hedron Archive. You pay 6, you divide that by 2, it's at least giving you half the mana value or more. Like a Soul Ring is double. It's obviously very good. Mana Crypt's, you know, infinitely better because it's cost nothing. So you're definitely going to be running Mana Crypt. Hedron Archive. Okay, 4 colorless, 2, it taps for 2, and then you can sacrifice to draw 2 cards. You'll have a certain point where you have so much mana, especially if you have an infinite mana with the Basalt Monolith, that you'll be able to like sacrifice these to draw cards to kind of keep going. The deck has a decent amount of draw for colorless, which is pretty cool. You got Herald's Horn. Herald's Horn, 3 colorless. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Eldrazi is going to be your creature type. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card of the chosen type, you may reveal it, put it in your hand. And then it also, creatures that you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. You got Ingenuity Engine. This card is actually very strong. It's an engine in itself, which is really good. I guess that's why it's called Ingenuity Engine. But an engine being there's a lot of value. With your commander, you're cascading 3 times because of Zhulodok is twice, and then this cascades itself. But then you also can tap 1 colorless, tap it, sacrifice an artifact, return target artifact you control to its owner's hand. You can get into these loop situations to where you can sacrifice one of your mana rocks that you've already tapped, sacrifice that, and then return target artifact. The Ingenuity Engine, you return it back to your hand, and then you just play it again. So if you have infinite mana, you can basically cascade through your entire deck with Ingenuity Engine, as long as you have the mana rocks to sacrifice to keep going. And most likely you will, because you're cascading for 7, or you're cascading for 3 times for 7. Or depending on what you cascade into. You're almost certainly, if you have infinite mana in Ingenuity Engine, you're almost certainly cascading the majority of your deck below 7. It's pretty good. You can do some good stuff. Jeweled Lotus is just fantastic because it's sacrifice. You just pay 3 mana. You know, get your commander out there ASAP. Pretty good. Lightning Greaves. This is just protection. Just gotta have it. 2 mana. 2 mana to play, and you equip creature has Haste and Shroud. Basically no downside because you're almost never targeting things in this deck, so you're fine. Mana Crypt, just 0 mana. You just get 2 mana. It's pretty good. It's infinitely better than it's just 2 lands for free. It's so good. And then the damage, who cares? Mana Vault, also very strong. You can't do anything where you're infinitely untapping or tapping because this taps for 3 and it only untaps for 4. So even if you tap for 4, you're not netting any extra mana. But what it does do is it's just a big ramp for 1 turn, and then any turn that you don't have the ability to, you know, cast something big, you can just spend that turn to untap this, so you get the 3 extra mana. So 1 colorless, taps for 3, pretty strong. And then you take a damage if it's tapped during your untap or during your draw step. Manifold Key. This is actually I should have mentioned this for things like Grim Monolith, Mana Vault, and even Soul Ring or your Basalt Monolith. This right here is fantastic because you can pay a mana and untap another target artifact, and gain extra mana by doing that. So it kind of turns those mana rocks back on to being useful, which is fantastic. You can also tap 3 and target creature can't be blocked this turn, so it gives target creature unblockable, which is pretty good when you're playing very large creatures. You've got Mind Stone, which is a mana rock that will replace itself if you ever need to get sacrifice and draw a card. Mirage Mirror, this is just very flexible, just becomes whatever the heck it wants to be for 3 mana. You can play it, and then 2 mana, you can activate its ability. Mirage Mirror becomes a copy of target artifact, creature, enchantment, or land until end of turn. It's so flexible. I guess there is a situation to where you can make your Grim Monolith and your Mana Vault tap for double mana as long as Forsaken... No, okay, so Forsaken Monument is a legendary. Okay, you can't do that. But either way, you can get tons of value from it. I'm sure there's combos with it in the deck, maybe. I'm not 100% sure, but it's still very, very strong. Just being able to copy any of your artifacts, can either turn it into a Mana Rock, you can turn it into a Rings of the Bright Hearth, you can turn it into... I mean, even top if you really wanted to. Ingenuity Engine to like bounce the other Ingenuity Engine back to your hand. There's a bunch of weird stuff you can do. Same thing with creatures. Like you can turn into one of your big Eldrazi's to annihilate somebody with something. Still very strong. Moonsilver Key. 2 colorless. Tap 1 colorless to activate it. Sacrifice Moonsilver Key. Search your library for an artifact card with a mana value, a mana ability, or a basic land card. Reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. This deck does play wastes, so you can get wastes with they are basic lands. So you get wastes with Moonsilver Key if you need it. Otherwise, you can go get one of your mana rocks that you need to go 2 to 4, like a Grim Monolith or a Basalt Monolith or a Mana Vault or Jeweled Lotus, whatever it is. Mana Crypt, just kind of a ramp. You've got Mystic Forge. Obviously, we're going to play Mystic Forge, of course, because everything in the deck is a colorless or an artifact. But it's 4 colorless artifact. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library. And then you can tap the Mystic Forge, pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library. Say if it's a land on top, and you can't play another land. Actually, you can't play lands with this anyways. So get a land off the top to be able to cast something else. Another thing is this also lets you know what you're going to cascade into, which is pretty nice. So you can try to cascade through those lands as well. You don't have to just use this as well. Which is great. Planeteer of Orthanc is actually pretty strong in this deck. It's such a weird card, but it's pretty awesome. So 3 colorless, legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, you put an influence counter on Planeteer of Orthanc and scry 2. Then, target opponent may have you draw a card. If that player doesn't, you mill X cards, where X is the number of influence counters on Planeteer of Orthanc, and that player loses life equal to the total mana value of those cards. Your whole deck is designed to play cards that are 7 or more. So even with just the first time you do this, if you mill, even if you mill 1 card, they could be taking 7 just to not let you draw 1 card. You're scrying, so you're able to control what's on top. So they could take 13. I mean, every time this gets a counter, you're scrying 2, and then you're milling X cards. If you have a way to manipulate your library for with a Sensitive Divining top. Obviously that would be also very strong with this. Even if you wanted to, you can play that scroll rack and then being able to put a bunch of expensive cards on top to then mill them. Yeah, pretty strong. Just another draw engine. It's a little memey. I could actually see it not being insane, but it's probably still very strong. Portal to Phyrexia. This is another one of those cards that are expensive and does crazy things. It will cascade, which is great, as long as you have your commander out. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. Pretty good board wipe there, or semi-board wipe. It's only opponents, so you're not worried about your stuff as well. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard, any graveyard, onto the battlefield under control, and then it's in a Phyrexian in addition to his other types. So it's a semi-board wipe and also Reanimator on something that, like I said, it's 9 mana, but it's not that big a deal. You can give 9 mana by turn 2 or 3. It's pretty insane if you have a nutty hand. But yeah, being able to sacrifice and then plus with Planeteer of Orthanc, is that the card? Yeah, Planeteer of Orthanc. You can mill those cards and then reanimate it with Portal to Phyrexia. So pretty good. You got Rings of Bright Hearth. This is one of those things where you can copy. Oh, this is the other Infinite with Basalt Monolith. And probably 6 mana on tap. So yeah, you can probably go Infinite with the Grim Monolith as well. Rings of Bright Hearth says 3 colorless. Whenever you activate an ability, if it isn't a mana, ability, you may pay 2. If you do copy that ability, you may choose 2 targets for the copy. So basically, what you're doing is you're copying the untap ability of the spell. You're not copying the activation of the mana to get extra mana. So for Basalt Monolith, for instance, you're tapping it for 3, and then you're using that same 3 mana to untap it and then you're paying 2 more mana to pay for it to untap itself again. You're untapping it twice, you're copying the untap ability, and then in response to the first one resolving of the untap, you untap it once, you tap for the mana, and then you let the other copy resolve of the trigger. If that makes sense. Then you're getting 6 mana, you're netting, what, 2 mana? You're netting a mana. You're netting mana. Yep. Sensitive Divining Top, this is just a way to manipulate the top of your deck, and because it's colorless, it's pretty good. I could see this being swapped out for Scroll Rack, but, you know, it's pretty good. 1 colorless, you can pay 1 colorless to look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. This is useful for cascading, being able to control how you cascade. It is only the top 3, but still pretty decent. It's pretty nice. And then you can also draw a card and then put Sensitive Divining Top back on top. So you could kind of, if you really wanted to, choose how to cascade, or choose to cascade. I don't know, I guess in an instance you could be like, if you happen to cascade into like a Thought Vessel, and you want to draw a card and then you could recascade back into Sensitive Divining Top, so you kind of like draw a card and then get the Sensitive Divining Top back into play, if that makes sense. I guess the Thought Vessel wouldn't cascade unless you're cascading from... I'm thinking of Animar. anyways, Soul Ring, very good mana rock. 1 mana, you get 2 of them back. It's pretty great. Stone Speaker Crystal, 4 colorless to get 2 mana back when you tap it. But then you can also exile any number of target player's graveyard and draw a card. This is just graveyard hate, but it's also a decent mana rock. You need some graveyard hate. Swiftfoot Boots, 2 colorless, equip creature has hexproof and haste. And equip cost of 1. The One Ring, it should be probably in every deck, unfortunately. I actually think that that's the reason why it will be banned in Commander. I truthfully think this will be banned. Give it a few months, I think this gets banned. It's the exact reason why they ban cards is where, like, when something is like so brain dead auto include, kind of like a Soul Ring, but I don't think they're ever going to ban a Soul Ring. But this is just so good. 4 colorless mana, legendary artifact, indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. That's already pretty strong. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. That's not that big a deal. And then you can tap it, put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Thought Vessel, good mana rock that gives you no maximum hand size. Thron Dynamo, very good mana rock. You pay 4 and you get 3 back. Very good ratio there. You get more than half of the mana you put in for the next turn. Urza's Incubator, when it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. It's going to be Eldrazi. Creature spells of the chosen type cost 2 less to cast. Pretty simple there. Warm Power Stone, another good mana rock. It does enter the battlefield tapped. It's slightly annoying, but you get more than half of what you put in, which is great. Taps for 2 mana. Ancient Tomb. This just taps for 2 mana. It does 2 damage to you, so I guess don't go all crazy, but I think the deck's fast enough to where, like, you'll have like a pretty crazy amount of things going on that you're not going to really worry about this 2 damage too much. Arcane Light. This plays a lot of colorless lands, obviously. So you have I mean, realistically, you probably don't even need to run any wastes. I found it, like, difficult to run any wastes, but I felt like you probably should at least run 1 or 2. But, I mean, why wouldn't you just run colorless mana everywhere? Is what I was thinking. Because, like, or why wouldn't you run land that tap for colorless so that you can just run all of the cool stuff, you know? So almost every land does something. This taps for a colorless, but also you can tap it for 1 colorless and tap itself until end of turn. Creatures your opponents control lose hexproof and shroud and can't have hexproof or shroud. Pretty strong. This can be something as a political piece to be able to say, hey, I'll remove the hexproof or shroud if you can get rid of that thing. Okay, Blast Zone enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it. Taps for a colorless, which is great. You can put X charge counters on it if you pay XX. And then you can sacrifice Blast Zone, destroy each non-land permanent with a mana value equal to the number of charge counters on the Blast Zone. Just a kind of a board wipe on a land, why not? Blasted Landscape, taps for a colorless, or you can cycle it. Sure, sounds good. Bonder's Enclave, you can tap it to add a colorless, and you know what? Yeah. So you can pay 3 mana and tap it to draw a card. Activate only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. You'll almost certainly have that, almost always. Cavern of Souls, you're going to say Eldrazi. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Say Eldrazi. You can spend 1 mana of any color, and spend this mana only to cast a creature of the spell's chosen type, and it can't be countered. But it always taps for a colorless, which is great. Eldrazi Temple. Taps for colorless, or taps for 2 colorless, but you can only do it to cast Eldrazi spells or activate abilities of colorless Eldrazi. You're playing an Eldrazi deck, so mostly. So this is going to be pretty good, no matter what it taps for colorless. So it's a land. Emergent Zone. Taps for colorless. This is great. Taps for colorless, or if you tap a colorless, tap it, sacrifice it. You may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. That's pretty good. You can do some sneaky stuff in response to stuff, people doing stuff, and stop stuff from happening. Stuff. Eye of Ugin. This is a land that reduces the colorless Eldrazi spells you cast by 2 less. There are Eldrazi tribal spells, like Not of This World, for instance. It will reduce that cost. Same thing with All Is Dust. It will reduce that cost because they are Eldrazi, which is great. You can also pay 7 mana, search your library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, put it in your hand. Pretty good. Good around a land. I like it. Inventor's Fair. Legendary land. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, which you run 32 of, and then plus the lands, you're going to probably have, you know, the 3. You gain a life. But not really that big a deal, because this always taps for colorless. You can also pay 4 mana and tap it, sacrifice it, search your library for an artifact card. Reveal it, put it in your hand. But you can only activate it if you have 3 more artifacts, so make sure you do that. And you can go get your 1 ring and be a badass. Karn's Bastion taps for a colorless. You can pay 4 mana and proliferate. It's useful for like very few situations, but surprisingly, actually, now that I think about it, you probably should run that artifact, that Everflowing Chalice. Everflowing Chalice with Karn's Bastion is pretty good. So maybe swap out one of the lands that tap for 4 mana and swap that in for like an Everflowing Chalice or something like that, because that would give proliferate a little bit more of a reason. Right now, the only thing you're really going to proliferate is, like, I guess somebody's poison counters or the 2 planeswalkers. Not many other counters in this deck, so not too amazing. But again, it just taps for colorless and it's universal. Your lands can do so much in this deck. Again, taps for colorless, which is great. Or you can remove target attacking or blocking creature from combat for 4 mana. Pretty great. It's just a land. Think of like every basic land in your deck that would normally do like just whatever. Every land just does something. It's just ridiculous. I love it. Majoring Network, taps for colorless. You can put a storage counter on it if you're paying 1. Then you can remove any number of storage counters from Majoring Network and add 1 colorless for each storage counter on it. So a good way to, hey, you can proliferate this counter. Look at that, pretty good. But a good way to store up mana and then pay. You have a big payoff, and you're not sacrificing land, which is great. Reliquary Tower, taps for a colorless, no max hand size. Pretty good. Making creature unblockable for 4 mana, also taps for a colorless for Rogue's Patches. Pretty good. You got Sanctum of Ugin, taps for a colorless, pretty good. And then whenever you cast a colorless spell with mana value 7 or greater, which you're trying to do pretty much the entire time, you may sacrifice Sanctum of Ugin. If you do, search your library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, put it in your hand. Pretty good. Tutor on a land. Also taps for colorless. Scavenger Grounds, you want to be able to interact with graveyards, exile all graveyards, and taps for colorless. Seagate Wreckage, taps for colorless, and you can pay 2 mana and a colorless, and tap, draw a card, activate only if you have no cards in hand. This card's not amazing. It's very rare that you'll have no cards in hand, but there's situations where you could, and at the very least, it taps for colorless. Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, taps for colorless, but also can tap for 2 colorless, and only to cast colorless spells. You can only activate if you have 7 or more lands. Surprisingly, you're running 34 lands and have decent ways to get lands in your hand and in play, so not too bad. Temple for False God. This one's taps for 2 colorless. Activate only if you control 5 or more lands. This one's a little sketchy because there is only 34 lands in the deck. You could say that this is probably maybe not worth it, but most of the time you'll have 5 lands. But maybe if you don't have 5 lands at the beginning, maybe it's not good enough. Oh, YouTube, man. Are you still watching? Anyways, so this could be removed for either a waste or some other colorless land. I would say almost all of these colorless lands are subjective. You could just pick whatever colorless lands you want, but I'm just showing you what I got. All right, Mycosynth Garden. This one's really good, actually. So you can tap for colorless. You can add 1 mana of any color, which you'll never use, because unless you have some way of stealing something from somebody, maybe. But you can use X, tap the Microsith Gardens, the Microsith Gardens becomes a copy of target non-token artifact you control with mana value X. Pretty good. Thespian Stage. Thespian Stage is just taps for colorless, which is great. Or you can pay 2 colorless, tap it, and it becomes a copy of target land, except it has this ability. So you can copy any of your amazing lands, like your Tron lands, for instance. Yeah, lots of mana. Tomb of the Spirit Dragon. Taps for colorless, or you can gain 1 life for each colorless creature you control for 2 mana. Pretty good. Decent life gain. Tyrant Sanctum, taps for colorless, or you can tap 2 mana, tap it. Target legendary creature becomes a god in addition to its other types. Put a 1 counter on it. Or you can sacrifice it and put an indestructible counter on target god. This is not it's not crazy, but being able to like make all your stuff gods and then like indestructible counters on gods, again, it taps for colors no matter what, so just one of those flex lands that could be decent. One of the most things I'm excited for is that it plays Tron. I've never got to play Tron in any deck. I've never played a format that really you could utilize Tron that well. Never made a colorless deck either. So playing Tron is super fun to me. And Tron in this deck, I'm sure in Tron and all colorless decks, they're better than the normal Tron because you've got more than just, there's like 5 Tron lands or something like that, 6 Tron lands. You've got Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Saga, Urza's Tower, and Urza's Workshop. Is that it? Yeah. And what they say is if you have all 3 Urza's Power Plant, Mine, and Tower, they tap for extra mana. So this one taps for 3, this one taps for 2, and this one taps for 2. But the cool thing about that is that they're not legendary, which is great. This is an Urza's land. Urza's Saga is an Urza's land, which is awesome, which matters because of this guy here, Urza's Workshop. This one just taps for a colorless normally, but it also has Metalcraft. Add colorless for each Urza's land you control. Activate only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So if you have like copies of these with Thespian Stage, you can copy Urza's Workshop. It's not legendary for some reason, even though it's, I mean, I guess they're all Urza's, but it's not legendary, so you can copy this, and then they each tap for 2. If you just have the 2 in the copy, you can make 3 different copies of it in this deck. Each would then tap for 3, and then if you have any of the other Urzas, they tap for 4 or 5. Urza's Saga would be 6. They lands can tap for a lot of mana, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, pretty cool. You have Vesuva in here as well. I like it. Wasteland, destroying a non-basic land, which is just useful to have in case there's like a like a glacial chasm or something stupid in play. But also always taps for colorless. Vesuva enters the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land on the battlefield. You really want to do like the Urza lands. Is like your like Urza's Workshop is like the dream, obviously. Like it's just so good. But Ancient Tomb's okay, but you'll be taking a lot of damage every turn if you do that. But any of the Urza lands are pretty good. War Room taps for colorless, of course, and then you can pay 3 mana. Pay life equals to the number of colors in your commander's color identity, which is 0, by the way. And draw a card. So tap, pay 3, draw a card. Pretty good. Wastes, those are just the basic lands of colorless. And now we're back to the Zhulodok Void Gorger. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I'll have the deck list in the comment section as well. This is fairly expensive, but if you're trying to reduce the mana cost, of the $1,200 budget, you can drop the this Grim Monolith. This is $250 right here. So you can drop that. That's not really required. It's nice to have, but not required. Same thing with Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus. That's another $160 and $71 there. The Mana Vault's another $40. You can you really get rid of these 4, and that takes like a couple $100 off, like almost $400 off of the deck list there. And then your lands, Ancient Tomb's not required. That's another $70 there. And other than that, everything else is pretty cheap. I mean, you got this Emrakul at $53, which is pretty expensive. I wouldn't say it's required. You can probably drop that, so save yourself another $50 and just replace it with another big Dirtily Eldrazi. There are some that I'm not running, so there's definitely open spots for it. And same thing with like Grim Monolith. If you want to replace Grim Monolith with like a, for instance, the Everflowing Chalice, that's a decent one. Just a mana rock that is mana positive, meaning you'll get at least half the mana. I guess I'm really not necessarily mana positive. For me, mana positive is anything that you can get more than half that you spend into it, or at least the minimum is half. Yeah. The deck's super fun. I can't wait to play more of it. I've only got to play a couple games. But yeah, Zhulodok Void Gorger. Very cool, colorless commander. Let me know if I'm not playing a card that you guys have. This is fairly current, so, you know, Should be playing any of the cool color stuff, but I don't think it's playing any of the stuff from Doctor Who. There might be some cool stuff in that. Thanks for watching, everybody. Share the video, like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.